After jumping down the stairs and standing at the base of it with the revolver in one hand and the insect leg blade in the other, I turned at what had broken into my lair. It was at least three cat-like humanoid figures standing in shock as I suddenly appeared with a thud. From what I could tell, they were all female, or molly cats. They stood in full view with very little in the way of clothing, which is how I could tell. Each one having a different color fur, yet they all had fur that was flat like a cougar or a puma. Though humanoid, and clearly female, they still kept a lot of their feline features. They all had the typical cat ears, but only one of them was very distinctly feline head and paws. The other two were far more human in their design, each one sporting nearly human appendages with clear adaptations into clawed hands and feet. They each stood about 6 feet tall, and they all had tails that seemed to be straight up due to be frightened. I could only look for a moment when another cat came from my side. This one charged on all fours and dove at me. What made him think he could draw from the drop when I was already holding a pistol was beyond me. I turned as fast as my groggy body could move and fired. Even though he was able to reach my arm as it fired, even a grazing hit from around that large will do significant damage. The bullet glanced off its head and it went limp for a moment as it crashed into me. We both tumbled to the ground as the body weight knocked me into the wall. As I was able to grab it and push it off, another one came out of nowhere and tried to slash me. It was able to slash its claws across the left side of my neck, which hurt like hell. With that, my adrenaline kicked in and I was fully aware of my surroundings and what was going on. I tried to raise the revolver up to get another shot, but this asshole just kept slashing at my arm in blind fury. I couldn't get the pistol lined up to take a shot, so I used it as a shield to try and protect myself. Raising my other hand, I was able to push the first body off of me. Seeing this, the second one tried to mount me so it couldn't get up, and that is what he thought. Using my tail and wings, I was able to immediately rise myself to my feet. This shocked the hell out of my attacker, but didn't dismay him for long. He backed up a little and got ready to pounce on me. I chuckled inside because that only works as an ambush. When he dove at me, I simply caught him by the neck and began to squeeze. As I brought the pistol around, I saw something move in my peripheral vision. I could see the insect leg being slung clumsily in my direction. As a reaction, I put the tomcat I was holding between me and it. The insect sword sliced in deep into the tomcat's back. Even though, as it came down, the tip made its way all the way through, I dropped the tomcat and it took its last breath as it hit the floor. The blade had cut in from the shoulder to the center torso, opening up the entire chest cavity and exposing the heart. I could actually see it as it takes its final beats as the rest of the body relaxed and slumped down. The blade itself was stuck inside the body since it was unbelievably sharp, but it's still no katana. The first tomcat tried to pull it out, but it was unable to due to the shape of it. From that angle, I grabbed it by the throat, just like the first one, and raised it to the ceiling. It was thrashing all over the place and tried to claw at my arm. The claws hurt, but didn't really do any meaningful damage. Think of it as a painful scrape against human skin that is enough to make you wince in pain, but isn't really enough to leave any visible damage, except maybe a red mark. In frustration, I began to slam it against the wall, but one of the times I pulled it in, the bastard got inventive. Using its leg, it decided to kick me in the low area and used its claws to maximize the effect. This made me scream out of pain and go into a rage. Just like any man that's been kicked in the balls, the ass whooping you get afterwards is totally warranted. I spun the pistol around to beat the tomcat across the face a few times with it, seeing blood, the flesh rip and spray with each strike. When it was clear I had taken the fight out on him, I dropped the pistol and put both hands around its neck. It didn't take long before I heard and felt the pop, and he went limp for the last time. Dropping the body, I examined my parts to make sure nothing was missing. Though it was all there, the claws had caused a laceration on my second you know what. It wasn't very deep, but enough that I would have to deal with it. Looking over at the mollycats, I noticed that there was not three, but five of them. I slowly picked up my pistol and headed back upstairs. I knew I needed to dress this wound before it went septic on me, and then definitely bad things would happen. Seriously, though, who wants to die from a staph infection on their dick? Once I treated myself, I went back downstairs where I found the mollycats were still there and eating my food. I forgot to grab the pistol from upstairs before heading back down, but I really didn't care at this point. I walked over and they all seemed to be so emaciated that they would risk their lives for this food. As I stood over them, I noticed the smell of ammonia in the air. Looking around, I could see that they had been standing during the fight. Well, there was a lot of piss. Too much for just one of them. I guess I must have looked pretty imposing, holding that tomcat in one hand, wings extended out, and tail out in the breeze, and a large revolver over in my hand. So I guess I'll give him a pass on this one. The mollycats were slowly reaching for the meat I had been drying near the fire pit, without taking their eyes off me, that is. At least two of them were physically shaking at the sight of this giant lizard man thing with wings so big they almost didn't fit through the doorway. I broke the silence with, "So, should I be expecting any others?" They all froze at the sound of me speaking, looking up in disbelief of what they had just heard. They just were flabbergasted. After a few seconds, I spoke again. "Can you speak?" I asked them. They looked confused at each other, and then one spoke up, saying, Yes, we can talk." I nodded a little and asked her, "How come you tried to break into my lair?" As I unknowingly opened my wings a little out of frustration. She began to shake and withdraw as another one placed her, I guess you could say, hand on the first one's shoulder in an attempt to comfort her. Then the second one spoke up, saying, "We are seeking sanctuary." If I could have smirked at that point, I would have. "Sanctuary?" I said before turning my head to the bodies of the two tomcats. I turned back and said, "Try again." I made sure I was very blunt. The second one withdrew a little as she realized she wasn't fooling me. Finally, one of the furthest from me spoke up and said, "We needed food!" She said this rather loud. The others seemed to try and hush her as though being loud was dangerous. She quieted down a little and continued, "We have been on the move for weeks, ever since this." She motioned to her own body, and she continued, "We were all on our own for a while, but soon we all had to go out to find food, and that's when we realized how bad things were." She paused for a few moments before I spoke and said, "Enlighten me." She looked at the others, took a deep breath, and to explain how things have changed. This is where I had wished I had gotten a survival radio when my buddy told me to. Maybe I would have known some of this. Approximately 25% of the entire world's population had changed into different human-animal hybrids. When they changed, many people were taken to the hospital by family members where they began their mutations. There wasn't enough staff, materials, or drugs to handle the massive influx of personnel by far, nor was there enough to deal with the unknown condition that seemed to kick in at random, which caused many random changes in a person's psychology. Each of the Mollies had a similar story on how they went through a similar painful change. One said how she watched her husband change into some sort of hawkish man before going nearly feral due to the hunger and attacking the neighbor. When she saw him use his talons to rip the man's head off and begin to eat the neck, she ran away. The liar spoke out how she had to watch one of her children change while the others two didn't. Her child began to have bear-like features and began to convulse violently before he just stopped. She paused for a few moments before trying to explain her words. I held up my hand, knowing that a child might not be able to handle the stress of a transformation as well. She told her remaining children to run to the neighbors as they were panicking and they had to pack up and leave. When the neighbor came to investigate, they found her on the ground in pain in the middle of the change. With a nod, they left with her two remaining children. I turned to the one that was more animal than human, and she immediately turned away. I canted my head in curiosity, and the shy one spoke up. She can't speak. Not since she changed. I gave her a nod and moved on to the last two. These two were quiet, mainly because they looked like they were both teenagers, or at least very young. When I checked, one was 15 and the other was 19. When they finished speaking about all their stories, I told them that if they wanted to earn their keep, they could stay. It didn't take more than a quick glance at each other before they all agreed. I told them to finish up and they could sleep in the next room. They happily finished and began to curl up on the couch and everywhere else. I was glad it was a sectional, at least that way they could spread, or they would have been sleeping on top of each other. While they did, I had work to do. I began to take the meat out of the smoker, being glad they didn't know what it was, and putting it into the bags for later. With that taken care of, it was time to move on to get the new meat available. I had to be as quiet as possible as I processed out the two tomcats, though I didn't take time to enjoy the heart and liver since I hadn't had breakfast yet. While processing them, I found that the mollies weren't kidding. There was very little to salvage on those two. Though the meat was nice and lean, it was clear that their bodies had started to eat themselves for nutrients. I almost felt bad, but they came at me first. I couldn't bring myself to eat the skin after trying to eat the hairy bat skin before, nor do I eat the head. I would have to be pretty damn hungry to do that, and I wasn't there yet. Starting a fresh fire and setting the meat to cook or preserve, I suddenly realized I was going to be out of wood very soon. I wouldn't even have enough to make it through the night, so I would have to scavenge during the day. Not the healthiest of ideas, but it's the only choice I got. Though I could wait until one of the mollies wakes up. Now, I know what you're thinking. He's only keeping them around because they're female. Actually, I'm keeping them around because, despite my new form, I am still human, and we're social creatures. If those toms hadn't attacked me, there would have just been two more to talk with. A shame, really. It was about 2 hours before the first one wandered back into the room. I told her that I need to scavenge wood and she needed to keep watch. She understood, and I went back to my room to get ready. I began by getting my armor on and realized that part of it didn't fit me anymore. In particular, it was the section I used as a codpiece. It wasn't just the bandages getting in the way either. Just exactly how many times is my body going to change? Because this is getting annoying. I don't have too much time to think about it. I just put everything on the best I can and went back downstairs. Walking over to the Molly cat, realizing that another one had joined him, I asked, "Do either of you know how to use one of these?" Holding out a rifle I had scavenged. The first one looked confused, but the other one said, "I do." I handed her the rifle and she immediately cleared it and made it ready. I would have grinned if I could have grinned, but at that moment I just left. Making my way into the woodline, it didn't take long at all to find what I needed. It was just going to take a lot of trips to get it all secured. On one of my trips, I could see the mollies start to take pieces of the meat. I had to remind them that if they eat everything, then there will be nothing left. And if they eat too much, then they will make themselves incredibly sick, and that is not something they want. To keep them occupied, I had them stacking the wood I was bringing in. It took the entire morning, but I finally got enough wood to last us for a few days, maybe a week if we were careful. That afternoon and evening, they informed me of a few more things that were happening outside my little territory. At first, everything was an insane melee, as freshly transformed creatures roamed the world looking for something or anything to eat. This led to a lot of resources being consumed in short order. Now, this could be anything from a grocery store to a box store or a ranch or farm being raided to attacking each other or even eating people. A couple of them lowered their heads at the last part. They didn't have to say anything since survival is survival. Most, if not all, of the major cities have now become enormous hunting grounds for creatures large and small. Any people that are left are more prey than predator at this point. 3 of the 5 had all come from the closest city, where it was now being controlled by things that are definitely not human. The worst one they knew of was a city to the east that had been overrun by a larger and far more dangerous form of cockroaches. These were the size of a small dog with mandibles that could easily take a finger off. Once the video surfaced of them taking down full-size soldiers, the city itself had been nuked. I heard this and replied with, "I hope that was the only one." They looked around at each other and started asking if they heard of another city getting torched. Thankfully, no. Now, this wasn't the best table conversation, but then again, we weren't using a table. Later, I took the night guard so they could rest a little more. Reaching the roof, I got a running start and took off into the night. Gliding above the area, I kept my pattern small so that I could keep an eye on the lair while they kept watch. It was a warm night, and my mind burned with questions. What caused this to happen? How many different mutations are there? How are they able to find groups like this? Why does my body keep changing? How long will the food reserves last? How long until I need to make another water run? Was it smart to let them stay? Should I have just killed them? Should I tell them the toms were dinner? Can we even stay here? Will another convoy come looking for survivors? Should we try to reach the people? What the hell were those pig things? Could the dog things talk too? Mantis, now cockroaches? How many different bugs are there? Are there any like me? Why? Why is this happening? Why can't I just... The light of dawn began to show as I made my way to the lair. I landed on a roof and crawled my way inside to find the Molly that can't talk next to the youngest one making breakfast. I got some water from the filter and took my share up to my room. Before leaving, I reminded them to keep the safety on the rifle. Making my way to the bathroom, I made sure the doors were open so that I could see. I took off the bandages from the first time after getting cut down in the... Though there was a lot of dried blood, the wounds themselves seemed to have been sealed. In fact, I couldn't even see a scar. This was strange. Even stranger with the changes to my muscle structure and my abdominal showing clear definition. I didn't think the fight with the 2 toms could cause such damage, or such a change. Ah well, at least there was one more thing not to worry about. I grabbed some of the old clothes that I had remaining. Now, none of them would fit me, but maybe it would fit the Mollies downstairs. Only one way to find out. I went back and told them that I had extra clothes, but they might want to wash up first. Agreeing, as I knew females would, they began to head for the water rations. I had to tell them that they would have to go to the river with me since the water was for drinking and the pond had been contaminated from the fight with that giant turtle motherfucker. 2 of them opted to stay, the one that was mostly feline, and the liar. The rest of us moved out and headed towards the river. Staying on the ground to keep from being spotted, we made our way to the river with towels and containers for water. Might as well stock up while we can, right? Though the trip itself was uneventful, it didn't stop us from moving cautiously all the way there. We could smell the water as we got closer, and the Mollies began to get excited. What woman wouldn't be excited about not having a soak or a rinse in, a month? When we got to the river, I insisted that we fill the containers before they relaxed. Since they were looking forward to it, they whispered under their breaths things like, "Party pooper." I didn't care and began to get what we needed before they started playing in the water. We don't need it further contaminated. Once everything was full, they stripped off the rags that they had on, at least the few that they had, and climbed into the river. The river itself was fairly large, so they had plenty of room to swim. Now, you might think that being part feline, they wouldn't like the water, but it seems to be much more female than feline. I, on the other hand, climbed a tree to keep watch for anything that might be attracted to the noise. As the girls played, I watched for the slightest movement or sound that would give away anything approaching. I thought my ears were deceiving me when I heard human voices. The human voice is very distinguishable in the middle of the forest. I looked around in the direction and noticed movement about maybe 100 meters away, maybe more. I could hear the girls playing, but also the delighted sound of a child. Wait, was that children? Climbing down, I silently made my way across the river, sleeking across as though a snake that was slightly submerged. It took me but a moment to realize that I was moving almost like an alligator across the water, my wings tucked in tight and my tail slithering back and forth through the water. Aided by the paddling of my hands and feet, I crossed the 50, maybe 60-foot wide river in just a few moments. Climbing up on the bank, I stayed low and moved through the undergrowth. Listening as I went, I could hear kids being loud and adults trying to keep them quiet, though they had nothing on how loud the mollies were being. As I got closer, I began to see what was coming. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that it wasn't what, but who was coming. It was an entire group of refugees making their way through the forest on an old camping trail I didn't even know was there. The kids had noticed the mollies having fun and had to be held back by the adults so they didn't just run to the river. It was well thought out formation. Guards in the front and the back, with the children in the center. Each adult was armed with a long gun, with over half of them carrying sidearms as well. The packs didn't look all that heavy considering the amount of people moving. The men were all on high alert, so I guess they had seen some action recently. I watched them carefully as I approached the river. Unfortunately for them, they reached it with a small washout. This cliff dropped down about 9 feet into the river. They would have to walk around and find a way to the water. As the man talked, I could see them look down to the river and the sound of the females playing. I could hear them talk for a second, and then one of them got a malicious grin on his face as they decided to go towards the small pride of females. I followed, keeping myself out of sight, though it wasn't far before I could find a spot to reach the river. I knew they would be getting close enough to see what was truly making all the noise. The kids had immediately jumped in the river, and just to cool themselves off with the water must have felt refreshing on such a hot day. The ladies also began to clean up, but most of them kept their clothing on. Being that it was summer, there wasn't much to take off anyway, though a few did strip down to nothing just to cool off all the way. I knew that within the amount of fragrance coming off the group this large, it wouldn't be long before the mollies could smell it too. Even though I wanted to sit and watch the show, I needed to follow the ones that were going towards my group of mollies. It was not easy to sneak around the large group, as their guards had been posted. I think the saving grace was the fact that they wanted to peep on the feline ladies too. Also, the undergrowth had begun to fill in around the area, making it easier to move without being detected. 2 men had begun to move around the corner and could see the silhouettes as they splashed and laid out in the sun. I knew it would only be a moment before their eyes adjusted enough to see. I was too far away to strike when they stopped. I got ready to charge when I noticed one pulling something out of his buddy's pack. It was a set of binoculars. The first one looked and almost immediately pulled them down to see if there was something wrong with the binoculars before putting them back to his face. He then proceeded to laugh. His buddy wanted to look and then got a chuckle himself. I had to stomach through the comments about nice pussy and wet pussy, while they discussed whether or not even to say anything to the group. Without me knowing, a teenage male had walked past me, within a feet foot of my head and met up with the two men. They joked and handed the young man the binoculars for him to get a good, solid look. Wow, the vile things that came out of that boy's mouth would have made his sailors proud. I will admit a couple times I had to stop myself from laughing at a couple of the jokes. I waited and waited until I saw one of them pull a rifle off of his shoulder and begin to raise it. All my muscles tightened at once as I heard him say, "Maybe I can get a better view this way." I took a breath of relief and watched his hand carefully. If that finger found its way into the trigger guard, it would be the last movement he made. Suddenly, the tone changed. Looking over at the mollies, they had all suddenly stopped and were looking around. I knew that they had smelled the large group, putting them on high alert. The men realized this and got low and quiet. I was slightly impressed at the efficiency that they moved to avoid detection while keeping their eyes on the target. At least one of them must have had military training. I couldn't see much of the mollies, but I knew that they were that quiet and that they might be getting ready to leave. Now was not the time to do anything stupid, though. That's when I heard the sound I recognized, but it made my skin crawl. It was a bunch of clicks and snaps that even the men could hear, though they looked confused. That is when we heard this first scream. The loud, fear-induced, panicked, shocking scream. A second after that, screams began and shots were fired. Then came a barrage of others, along with panicked yelling. The men turned and ran back to the group as fast as their legs could take them. When they turned and at the bend of the river, they could see that a swarm of those mantis things were coming in from all sides. The guards were desperately trying to hold them back with gunfire while the women and children retreated to the river itself. There was no solace to be found by running across the other side of the river. Clearly showed 4 of them green semi-human bastards. On the side I was on, there must have been 24 at least, each one moving as though their entire thing had been planned, with 1 or 2 forcing the lines to tighten, and when one was exposed, another bug would come out from the side to take the guard out. Their large caliber weapons did some damage, but the lower caliber, 9mm and smaller, just pissed these damn bugs off. This caused the bugs to lunge forward to take out either the weapon or the person carrying it. Those front limbs making short work of anyone they reach. This was going to be a slaughter. Not on my watch. Not today. As the 3 men joined the fighting, the bugs adapted quickly with the movements of their lines. What they didn't count on was a very pissed off lizard coming in full bore. Coming in the side, they didn't see me coming. Aiming for the center of the formation, I crashed into the central bug with my 2 blades at the ready. Knocking the first bug over, I ran into the next one, taking his head clean off. The next one saw me coming just in time to see me bury the insect blade into his head. It didn't come out clean, so I had to leave it behind, embedded in this thing's frickin' head. The next one saw the danger and tried to strike, so I blocked it with the blade and used my claw to tear open its torso on the way by. It screamed in pain as it fell over. I had to pull back as the element of surprise was gone. Plus, I was down 1 blade, and I didn't know if this pistol would even work. Running in a large circle, I could see bullet impacts all around as the fighting continued. Coming back in, I hit the next one, but this friend was already for me. It sunk its bladed arm into mine. The pain coming through my upper arm was enough to make me roar in pain and anger. I reached down, grabbed the leg from one I had pushed over, ripped it off, and shoved it into the eye of the bug piercing me. It screamed and staggered as it ripped the blade appendage out of me. The one on the ground screamed and thrashed as I drew the blade I had dropped and shoved it through this thing's torso. It was screaming in pain as I looked up as the one I stabbed in the eye. It was staggering back still as it tried in vain to remove the spike from its eye. Before I could act, shots rang out and down went the bug in a fury of bullets. Turning and running the other way, I realized I would have to cross-draw my pistol since my dominant arm had been punctured. Once the pistol was out, I put 3 rounds through the first bug I saw. I didn't have to worry about the bullets not working after all. I did have to worry about the fact that this was only carrying 5 bullets in it. The next one took the eye off the next bug I saw. The impact with such a large bullet caused the eye to utterly explode and splash yellow sludge all over the crowd. Though gross, I didn't have time to admire my work as the next bug appeared and I put a bullet into its bulbous insect abdomen. This made it fall over in pain. Now, without ammo, I dropped the pistol and tried using all 4 limbs to run around slashing up the bugs with every opportunity. As I ran, I could hear a woman scream in pain and a child scream in terror. I looked and saw one of the bugs had backed a woman and children against the drop-off from earlier. The woman had been sliced and the bug was moving in on the children. Charging the bug must have heard me coming because it turned a bit before I hit it, unfortunately knocking one of the kids into the water with us. On the way down, I buried my claws into its side and began to rip the damn thing open. It was screaming as we hit the water. Once underneath the water, it went for broke and thrashed at me in random movements. I was surprised that it could see so good underwater and used my hands and feet to rip the torso open. As it stopped moving, I realized that it had slashed my leg open in a final, defiant move. I looked around and saw the child, maybe 4 years old, panicking underwater. I swam up, using my wings to get a crazy amount of speed, and I got the kid to the surface. As we did, I yelled, "Hold on!" as I swung him on my back, and he held onto my neck, and we swam back to shore. Upon reaching the shore, I was totally exhausted from the whole fight. Once I got the kid far enough out of the water, I just had to stop and catch my breath. I could feel the kid being lifted off my head by someone, and hot steel being pushed against my head. Thanking God that I was wet, making the barrel of whosever rifle this was, making it not burn as much, or at all. I could hear the kid coughing as they checked to see if he was all right, and started talking about what to do with me. When one of the men said, "Just shoot it," I heard a familiar voice yell from across the river, "He just saved you, asshole!" I wanted to look to see them standing defiant across the river, but I was so tired I was having trouble breathing. A few more screams at the people pointing the rifle at me from across the river as I slowly got my breath back. Once the rifle's muzzle was off my head, I slowly got up, revealing the extent of my injuries. It must have been clear that I was weak due to loss of blood because of the softer expletives that came out as they looked on in shock. I got to one knee and tried to shake the water off my wings, but when I opened them up to shake them, a shot rang out, and I was violently pushed back into the river. As I got up again, I could see several of the people berating one I hadn't noticed, going so far as to take his weapon away. He must have been in shock when I stood back up so quickly, but I was just so happy to still be wearing my bug armor. When they noticed me standing there, I simply told them, "That hurt," and they didn't try that twice. Turning around to look at the mollies, I noticed they had dispatched the bugs on the other side with great passion and were making their way to my side of the river. Once there, I finally got some medical attention by one of the women. They didn't have so much, I protested, until I saw that they had taken care of their own wounded. Then they disinfected me with some alcohol, I'm guessing 151 from the smell, and dressed my wounds with some extra clothing. The mollies helped to retrieve the wounded since they could find the wounded much easier than any human could, though the percentage of dead was higher than they wanted to accept. There was a question about whether to burn or bury the bodies. I told them that burning them would draw every creature within 20 miles in any direction, and burying them would just mean that they would get dug up later. When they asked about other options, I simply told them that we, as in the mollies and I, would take care of it. I gave them directions to the apartment complex and to wait at the tree line for us to arrive. Though hesitant, they didn't have much of an option with the high number of wounded. I had to get a few across the river myself by gliding, which wasn't so bad, but landing on damaged limbs was very, very painful. Once the group left, it was time to take care of things. We looked across the 5 human bodies that remained on the ground in front of us. It would have been more, but the other half had been taken away by the bugs to whatever hive they crawled out of. I looked at the girls and asked, should we divide it up or first come, first serve? One of the Mollies said, first things first. Then she knelt down and folded her hands in front of her. The others joined, but I remained standing due to the pain in my leg and arm, though I did bow my head. I know what we were about to do. We were going to unsettle us a lot, but it had to be done. We had burned so much energy fighting that we would need to replenish it if we were to make it back and keep ourselves safe and ourselves sane. You could say that it was refreshing to eat when you're that hungry, but I just couldn't stand the fact that every piece of them was going to be eaten. The only thing remaining was the gut pile, as it was rather gross and bitter to eat, though far less bitter thanks to the hunger remaining strong. It was 3 men and 2 women that were in front of us before we started. I can still hear the tearing flesh, the slurping of blood and muscle as it went down the hatch, the breaking of bones as they crunched it in my mouth, the cracking of bones as the girls got to the marrow, snapping the tendons as powerful jaws ripped them from the bone, the scraping of brains being scooped out of the head before swallowing, the pop of the eyes as they came out of the sockets, the belch of a full stomach from 2 full humans. Packing the remainders into our sacks to be bring back to our brethren, there was only a few bone fragments left on the ground when we were all finished an hour to an hour and a half later. I remember it all. This time, I willingly swam across the river to wash all the blood off of me. I even submerged to see if I could still see as good as before, and when I looked up, I could just see wet, matted fur of the girls as they swam overhead. For a moment, I thought, maybe. We reached the group, and the girls went inside to tell the other 2 what we're going to have visitors. Well, sort of. They wouldn't be in the same building, but the remaining of the same complex as us. We brought over as much food, water, medical supplies, and clothes as we could spare, and they were more than grateful for the assistance. When one of the still humans was saying how grateful and thankful she was for all the assistance to us, one of the Mollies simply said, "Of course, we're all human after all." And that's when a child spoke up, "No, you're a kitty." Everyone stopped for a second, thinking the kid had just insulted their saviors. The Molly just chuckled and brought her head close to the kid's face, saying, "You're right, I'm a kitty cat," and rubbed her nose against the child's, making him laugh. With that, of course, everyone calmed down. I told them to still be on guard and that I would be flying tonight to keep them covered. I knew this would make them feel a little safer, but what I didn't tell them is that I was going to go back to salvage bug parts and armor for weapons and tools. That night, I made sure they were watching as I took flight to the sky. I kept the pattern small for an hour or so and then began to widen my perimeter. With an excellent night vision, it would be easy to see if anything was coming. Eventually, my search led me back to the fight. I landed and found that the site had been untouched, so I got to work. The smell of those bugs was just rancid, though at least this time I didn't have to taste it. With the amount that was left, it was going to take me hours to get the pieces I would need, clean them off, and deliver them back to the lair. Also, with such a high amount of it, I would need multiple trips. I wouldn't be sleeping tonight. even though I could feel it creeping in slowly over the course of the night. By the first crack of dawn, I have finished and I'm coming in for a landing on the roof. I was taken back by how many of the young ones had woken up just to watch me fly and land. I would have shown off, but my arms and legs still hurt a lot. That morning, we were able to share food again, but this was cutting into supplies far too fast to be sustainable. We need to find some food and fast. The Mollies came up with a really good idea.